Hello, everybody, and welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the fall-winter class, and this is our last office hour. So today we're going to go through the questions we have on hand. We're going to go into potentially what's next, so talking about where and how to move forward within your permaculture world. And if we have any extra time, we'll kind of muse on the next conversations. A couple of things I wanted to bring people's attention to. Got a couple announcements here. We just did a great presentation. Hold up, I'm just gonna mute folks for now. We just had a great presentation recently with
Yeah, I'm
Jeffrey
here.
Adams. Oh,
Oh, wow, I'm still virtual summit, but I'm here. Sorry.
no worries. I'm just gonna click on the mute upon entry. There we go. All right, what was I talking about? Right. So we had a great webinar with Neil Bertrando and Jeffrey Adams on Thursday, all about low-tech erosion control. So if you're keen on learning about low-tech erosion control, I highly recommend checking out this webinar. There is an offer, and I just extended the offer until the 12th. So we rarely put this course on sale, usually once a year. And so the course is currently on sale until next Sunday. So if you're interested, this could be a great course for you. This basically goes through how to use sticks, stones, and rocks to slow and pacify water. And if you do anything, I highly recommend you go to the landing page and look at the case studies, because you can learn a lot just from the case studies of how Neil and Jeff have gone about pacifying water. So it's a good little freebie there if that's of interest. Second, a lot of you have been reaching out and asking about mentorship, which is great. This is the first year I'm thinking of offering it in a community cohort. So this is my idea as it exists today, and I'm open for it to change. But basically, for the last 15 years, I've helped 65 businesses either start, launch, pivot, or strengthen themselves within a permaculture vein. Ongoing, I've got 3 more this year. So what my thought was to share with everybody my process about how to assess and design businesses from scratch. The idea was to do 2 sessions a month. So the first session would be content about assessment, skill assessment, how to create a plan to go about acquiring more skill, how to create a plan to make your first viable offering, plus Q&A. And then the second session would be case studies. So basically we'd be inviting in a colleague or somebody within the permaculture realm to talk about their business. I would have set questions, and students would be able to ask questions as well. Focus would be on assessing your current skills, likes, and local problems, assessing and building a plan for your business desires and required skills. We'd focus on the 3 pillars of regenerative business: craft, reputation, and business systems. The focus would be to develop a product or service and launch during that first year. So much of what I've been doing over the years is really getting in and getting out quickly. So that would be the focus. An option to stay in the community for as long as is useful. So tentative launch date is May. If you're interested in that, sign up for the All Points Design newsletter. I'll also be sending out a poll to both this class and the previous classes to see who might be interested. We'll see if we can find enough people for a cohort. And then the second would be about design specifically. So the first one is really about business. So how do you design a business? How do you go about it? And the second one would really be about design process. So if you're interested in increasing your design abilities and attributes, that would be that second. It would be a very similar conversation. So just a few announcements about that. Any questions about that before I move on? Any of that?
So you'll send out, sorry, just to make sure, you'll send out a message about it in terms of what would be next steps potentially for that?
Yeah. I'm going to send out two messages. One's going to be an email that'll go out to your class, the whole class, not just our group, and also the previous classes, saying, here's what I'm thinking about offering, and we'll see if there's enough people who are keen. And then if it gets offered, then anybody who's on the All Points Design newsletter, I'll send out saying, here's what the offer is, and we'll see if we get the signups required. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Deanna. Any other questions?
And the cost will be sent out in the email, I'm assuming?
Yeah, the cost will be set out in the email, or I'll probably put in a range when I send out in that first poll, just to get a sense of it. I'm looking at similar offerings from colleagues who don't have the same ability or skill that I have, and they're looking at 12 or 1300 a year. I'm thinking, because it's a beta, I'm going to keep it lower than that, because we're going to be building a lot of the course as we go, and I want that to be acknowledged. So somewhere, I don't know, within that sort of probably 800 range, I'm thinking, as I'm speaking out loud, which is dangerous. But so you said 800. I was like, yeah, around there. So yeah, probably somewhere between that 800, 1300 conversation.
801.
What's 800? Bob 801. Yeah. It's a generation, if you know Bob Barker, for sure. Linda has asked that I hold off on her questions because she's coming at 1:30, so I am holding off on those. And we're going to go to Minthia's questions. And Minthia confessed or thought that she was the most annoying student. No. You're definitely the most engaged. It's great to get all the questions, so I appreciate it. It's always good to ask questions. Okay, so I contacted the County of Rocky View regarding waterways. We have a spring runoff stream that shows up on the map, but is not named and is dry most of the year. It runs into the creek south of us. I'm not sure what my rights and responsibilities are in terms of waterway and what I can do about it. Can I build a pond beside it? Can I plant willows at the edge of it? Can livestock drink from it when it has water? Do I stay away from it? Where can I get information? So basically, it's always check with your legal authority. And then there's the Water Sustainability Act, or the Water Act, that Alberta put together. And then I think just 3 years ago revised. I'm going to give you two answers to this. One is there's a conversation about the burden is always on the designer within permaculture. So whatever we do will become an issue for somebody. Wendell Berry has this beautiful saying of, do upon those downstream as you would have those upstream do upon you. So this conversation of what is the effect that we can have downstream to us, let us be conscientious of that. That is sort of there's man's law, human law, and natural law. And natural law is, let's be aware of who's around us and let's do right by them. Sometimes human law is silly and makes no sense whatsoever. Generally, when we're taking a look at waterways, if something is named, if it's a named creek, it generally is underneath a stipulation, and you will have to work underneath that stipulation or be at the behest of the legal entity that has created that law. If it's unnamed and if it's seasonal flow, generally there's not an issue with what you do. However, if a water officer heard me say that and came to my house, they could still make problems. So generally, my recommendation is understand what the law states about that water body, understand it from their perspective, and then make the choice that you feel is best for the ecology and your family, knowing that the consequences would be X. So it's my responsibility. This is what I believe. It's my responsibility to inform my clients of the legal ramifications of what they want to do. And this is why my first step in design is called a feasibility study. They ask me all these elements. I want to do this and this and this and this and this. And so part of my assessment is I will check in. Sometimes I'll work with an urban planner who understands the legalese of everything. And sometimes I'll just read the regulations myself and ask questions, depends on time. And basically give them a go, no go. So years ago, I was working with a client over in the Thompson Valley area, and they wanted to have a campground. And so part of my feasibility study was to check into the regulations to show them that a campground is probably 5 years out because of the intense legal ramifications, because there was a bunch of festivals there for about 20 years. And so there was a bunch of festivals, people got annoyed, people pushed back. They couldn't push back against the festival or the gathering, but they could push back on the camping, and that's how that law was enacted. So there is a duty of care piece there. So that's what I would suggest, Minthia. Just make sure you know exactly what the rights and the legal conversation is. The stipulations in both British Columbia and Alberta are actually and across the world, as I start talking with more clients and students, are getting more and more stringent in terms of water. And there's a lot of very interesting grandfathering elements that are coming into water, right? So I would just say be very aware of them. And then if you are going to deviate, know that X will happen. So I had a client who was not allowed to put in an impoundment of water. They asked me to design it. I designed it for them. And then I told them, this is illegal. This will not pass in your area. They said, we don't care. We like what you have to say about civil courage, and we just have to store water on this landscape. They did so. They were very nice with their neighbors, and no one ever found out. So, you know, there's a fair amount of wiggle room there, but the main thing is don't be the designer that says, I'll build you a pond, you build a pond, and you don't look at the regulations. And then all of a sudden, local authority comes in and serves everybody with a cease and desist. So does that help? Or does that make
Yeah. And so water is more of a provincially regulated thing as opposed to municipal?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So that Water Act will be across Alberta. And then it's kind of like police officers. You can find police officers that are decent and good, and you can find police officers who have decided to become police officers to be on a trip. And that's where the application of those laws change. So I've had really great water officers who are so stoked on what I'm doing and designing because they understand hydrology, and they're like, we want you to put it in. We just have to make sure it's safe, because the other side of it is duty of care. So they have to make sure that if that dam fails or that impoundment fails, nobody is at risk downstream. And in 1983, 4, 2, one of those years, there was a major failure of a dam in British Columbia, and that became the big issue. And so that's why when I was doing a tour of teaching around keyline design, I was presenting alongside the water officer, and we were talking about live load and dead load and how to put things in. And basically they were alongside saying, hey, we love all your ideas. We just have to make sure it passes muster. So.
Cool.
Question
Good to
2.
know. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Do you know any general information around pipeline right of ways? I have also contacted the company via email twice without response. I will also try calling, but haven't yet. Wonder if there are general guidelines to what you can do and can't do with pipeline right of way. I'm assuming it can only be used for pasture. So I found basically the ROW, the right of way for oil and gas. Generally, it's going to be the same across province. Every once in a while, a certain company will have some leeway, but you have to think in the chain of command, the more time you eat up a safety compliance officer's time, the company's less interested, because that person is now focusing on an external request as opposed to an internal money-making process. So generally it's pasture, and generally there's issues. The main issue you want to be conscientious of is that if you are trying to move water around a landscape, you generally want to stay away from those right of ways. You can do some things on the surface if you want to like slowly move water across. They don't like it at all because they don't understand it. And basically within their confines, whatever is true for them. It's like any bureaucracy. They don't like playing in novel practices. They only like best practices, which are usually 30 years old, because they know they work and there's a time-honored conversation. So yeah, generally I would stick to pasture. Generally, I probably wouldn't be tilling or working the earth more than a meter deep, because sometimes those pipes are actually quite shallow. So, and they don't like it, and you won't like it if you hit them. It'll be bad news for everybody. There'll be no bueno. We have a bit of a septic situation. It appears as though our pipes from our tank to the leach barrel were not buried deep enough and are frozen. I'm so sorry about that. This has caused our tank to fill up and leak into the area near the house. I'm glad we found out, as we're going to have to put a bunch of veg beds in the area come spring. I'm wondering if this is a common issue for septics. Should you never plant near a tank, or is it a case of ours being installed incorrectly? Do you have planting suggestions for the area? I was thinking a perennial flower bed for pollinators, something that smells nice. Yeah. But will they all just die? Here's a pic of what is happening. Okay, so first principles, moving backwards. So first principles is where there is nutrition, there will be plant life. Point in case, we had a cottonwood that was like 45 feet away from our greenhouse. We were experimenting with heating the greenhouse with compost, very passive heating. You know, you're not a roaring fire, you're not roasting chestnuts, but it definitely adds to the heat. The compost was a meter and a bit, 1.1, 1.2 meters square. We built it, we left it for the winter. Come the spring, we came back, went to put a pitchfork in it, and the pitchfork bounced out. because the cottonwood roots basically found that nutrition and created a cube. It was insane. So I say that question, or I say that story to illustrate that where there is nutrients, there will be roots. And one of the main things we want to avoid is wherever the leach field is to keep our perennial woody deciduous trees and coniferous trees away from that area. So generally, we're not going to be putting in shrubs, berries, definitely not trees anywhere in that area or anywhere near the tank. Now, it was definitely installed incorrectly if those installers didn't understand what frost depth was, because that should never happen. Over the leach field, I pretty much always relegate it to pollinator wildflower habitat. I just put in the wildflowers and then just keep sowing every year until it gets the levels it wants, and then I leave it alone. And it just self-seeding annuals as it goes. It's great because it's a great place for the pollinators to be. They'll be there early in the season, be there late in the season. You can kind of just go to town with self-seeding annual flowers, which is super fun. Definitely, I would get it fixed and then make sure it's at depth. It should be. And then where does the leach field go from here? Or is it just collect in the tank and then you pump out?
No, there is a leach field across the road. It's on, when you open my document, it'll show it's across the road, kind of southwest. It's in an orange square. You'll have to zoom in, everything's tiny.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so it's all the way over here. So basically that tank is here and basically goes all the way over.
Yeah, that's right. And then, so there's just this one little area where it seems to be coming up from the earth.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know, the tank I think is buried properly, but my husband checked the pipes, they're not buried deep enough and they're frozen like a foot.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Foot of ice. Yeah, it's
That's
not
brutal.
good.
That's brutal.
Yeah.
Well, good thing you know about composting toilets. Yes. Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, good instincts, perennial wildflower. That's usually where I go with. Does that help to answer the question?
Yeah, so I shouldn't plant this. I should just plant like small flowers and stuff. There are no like lilacs or anything.
No trees, no woody deciduous. Like, if this hadn't happened, I would say go for it. But
Great.
the problem is that, do you know if you're going, like, is it just the pipe? Is the tank still fine? Or is it just the pipe that's the issue?
I think it's just the pipe is frozen because it's frozen near the leach field. So
Okay.
nothing can get into the leach field now. And I think once we're gonna get a bunch of dirt and bury it deeper. Because I think they had this problem before and didn't tell us when we bought the place.
Oh,
Yeah, so anyways, I think it's just not going, so it's backing up, and now like our septic wasn't full 2 months ago and now it's full.
gotcha. Okay. So are you going to rebury the line, or you're just going to put more dirt on top and raise up grade?
Well, it's in kind of a sunken area, so I'm wondering if they dug it out and then they just didn't actually fill it in enough when it's kind of in this like sunken area. So it looks like they themselves didn't replace the earth on top of it enough.
Sure.
So anyways, my husband he'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And we'll fix it so that hopefully, but like how many years has this been happening, right?
Probably a while.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're gonna have to dig down and fix the pipe anyways. That'll have to happen, and probably, I don't know if they've got shutoffs. Hopefully they do, else that's gonna be quite the job. But if you do relay the pipe and it's gonna be below depth of frost, then yeah, I would have no problems. Now that I understand the question, I would have no problems putting woody deciduous here over the pipe. Yeah, that would not be a problem.
Okay, but just until I'll just I don't know how long it's gonna take to fix, but until then I'll just put herbaceous
Yeah.
perennials. Okay.
Yeah. So just again, first principle, where there's nutrition, there will be roots, and they'll find it. They'll move towards it. So just be conscientious that until that's fixed, you definitely want to stay away from it from any big
And
shrubs.
And so that's just because the roots will damage the pipes.
The roots will get into the pipe, and then you'll have
Could you
roots
say-
formed in a pipe as long as it goes, and it'll find your tank, and then you'll be dealing with a much bigger issue. Yeah. So a lot of the lilacs and others, you know, these are pioneer species. They grow very fast if they're given nutrition. I don't know if you've ever actually fed a lilac, but the moment you feed it, it just goes, what? There's food? I'm very excited by this, and it just explodes both above and below. So yeah, I would say definitely stay away from it until it's fixed, and then afterwards come in once you're feeling totally confident with it, and then plant away.
Okay, good to know. Irises it is.
Irises it is. Yeah, exactly. Lots of prairie crocuses. Okay, so we were taking a look at your big water layer, and I think the question was, well, let's just read it. This might be too much of a long question, but I'm really trying to wrap my head around the water situation or lack thereof on the site, trying to collect as much possible and direct everything to somewhere useful. Could you have a look at what I have proposed and let me know if I'm out to lunch or if something could be done efficiently? I highlight some of the questions on my map. Okay, great. I'm just going to check and see if there's a few more coming in. Right. So yeah, so it looks like we've got an upper pond kind of where we were discussing originally. This is definitely the best spot for it. But chances are your local water agency is going to have a conversation with you about this element. So having that barn. So if you're thinking about phasing this, you may want to phase this first and then phase this second. So that way, when they come in, it's very clear. It's like, oh, there's a pond and there's nothing below it. And then if you have something like this, where we do have that water conversation, then there's a potential that they know that water can move off and out. The lower pond is the one I have a bit of concern about. So for everybody who wasn't on Mynthia's private conversation and eyes, which is everyone, generally, when you're looking at topography lines, when you see the valley form, that valley form is kind of talking to you that if you could put a dam across an area, chances are you could hold quite a bit of water. So this is an incredible spot to hold water because, and these are what? Are these 10 meter? What are these again? 13, 20,
I think
1300, 5, 10, 15, 20. Okay, so we're at 5, 10, 15, almost 20 meters, 60 feet above the house, which at 60 feet, 40 is 30. So you'll just be around 31, 32 PSI, which is great for low dribblers and things like that. So this could be a great value for bringing water into and through and onto the house and things of that nature. One of the ways that we were talking about in the design of this is also having overflow, so that way it was in areas that weren't of issue. So this swale would basically extend the reach of the pond, and I would extend it probably to the ends, so that way everything up here becomes watershed. So I'd probably extend it all the way this way, and then I'd likely put the overflow over here, just so that way there's a little bit more to absorb it, and it's away from the house again. So the main overflow I would probably put over here, and then I would probably grade this in such a way so that way this was first overflow, and then a little bit higher was second overflow on this side, just so that way the majority of the water would then overflow this way. Yeah, I'd probably do it that way. You could do it the other way as well. It could come this way. That all looks good. So pond 2 has a couple of issues with it. One, your collection swale is going cross contour. So now it's a drainage ditch, which means it'll channelize. So if we dug from here to here, we're going down 5 meters. Yeah, so we're going down 5 meters, going down 15 feet. So that'll channelize quite a bit. Probably what I would do instead is I would drop that collection swale first and foremost. Let me just grab a pen. I would keep it on this line, this level, and just allow this water to basically flow up and over this area and then interact with this again. And this is where I think you'd be fine for that rite of passage, or the ROW, making a small indentation, a small swale over top of that to catch that water and then bring it over. The other thing that's a bit of a problem is that we're definitely off contour here. And I wonder if there's actually a better spot to put it. So I'm going to just remove this. I wonder if this actually isn't a better spot here. And the only reason for that is that as we take a look at this line, and I'm just going to color it so everyone can see it with my amazing mouse drawing that's renowned throughout the land. Sorry, I clicked my other button. Okay, so this is that's our 1300 meter contour. So basically this has a little bit of indentation. It'd be really easy to do a dugout here. Very, very simple, which is nice. You could probably do quite a bit of volume of water. And then if you ran that line all the way over, put in a culvert between the road, you could pick up quite a bit of water in between this line and this line. And we could run the calculations if we brought this into Google Earth Pro. Basically, it would be this area internal. Everybody following along what I'm saying? Like this would be the roof for this pond. That makes sense to everybody? Nodding, slight nodding. I think it makes sense, but I'm still thinking about it. Okay. So basically this would be all of this volume that we could potentially hold here in this dugout. And primarily what we would do is we would take the water from here and overflow it here. The other thing we would do, I would suggest, if this were I, is I'd put a dock out here. And on that dock, I would put what's called a Holzer monk. So the way this works, if this is our pond, and this is our dock, and this is our uprights, is that we have a pipe that basically comes out and it has a friction fit elbow and it has a bathtub style drain. So basically what happens is this holds the water, and this water, so if this is here, this water could then be piped down to create aeration on the second pond. The great thing about this is that anytime this pond filled up or overflowed, it would first flow this way, and the swales would basically, the overflow on the level sill spillways would be secondary. And this water would then help to aerate this second pond, which then would increase the potential to not only have fish in this pond, but raising fish in this pond would be a no-brainer at that point. You would actually get a secondary protein source on your site. The overflow for this one should 100% go this way. We should stay away from this area and we should stay away from the house. But the nice thing is that this is a much shorter run if we wanted to run a fire prevention, a little Honda generator, and we wanted to run a pipe from there and make sure it's ready for the house. So this is a nice system to have set up because it would really help to fire protect the house, which looking at the last couple of years is an important piece to have. So that's the change I would make on the lower pond, is I'd probably move it to be a little bit more accessible with the area. That being said, you could, in your area, just do a big dugout right behind the house, keep it as dead load, which means that it's below grade, so there's no way it can fail. And then just have that overflow still come over here. And then you've got that pond right beside the house. And if you add a little solar air bubbler in there, that helps to keep it aerated. And who doesn't like a swimming hole right beside the house, right? So with that, you could also do some wapato and some cattails. You could actually get into some of the First Nation vegetables that they used to grow in steppes and little sloughs and wetlands and all the rest of it. And if you were keen, you could also keep ducks because the ducks would basically have a floating island. That floating island would then be refuge for the ducks. You could also have an inland area where you fed them and kept them for the winter, because that whole frozen island doesn't work too well in the winter for predators. But it would be great to have them so close. And again, if you augmented it so it's just a little bit over, then you've got space to move around to kind of go to and from the pond. So I think that system makes sense if you kind of redesign it a little bit. And if you want to have that pond closer, that would make sense as well. But otherwise, really good. So I guess the main thing I would say is, change that collection swale. And then that overland flow would be there as well. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. Definitely. I'm going to have to watch the video again to absorb it all.
Sure. Yeah. And feel free to ask any questions. Hold on. My husband just left and my dog's going to go nuclear. Just coming to hang out over here. Yeah, there you go. There you go. He'll be back. Yeah, I know. I know. Okay, so let's grab some of these questions. Should the groupings of boomerang swales be on contour? Why boomerang swales and why not just a swale?
I don't have a good answer for that. I thought that maybe boomerang swales would be a little bit more individualized to the trees, but maybe if I just do a whole big one like the one down at the driveway, maybe that's better.
I would say it does work. It's a lot easier because boomerang swales are usually created by hand, whereas a swale in your neck of the woods, somebody's going to come with a mini X. I think your husband has a mini X, right? Yeah. So he'll put a back blade on there and he'll basically just back blade the swale and then you plant the swale. It couldn't be simpler. You'll probably do a heavy mulch with either wood chips on the mound or straw, whatever you can find, and then you'll plant and probably guard them. So you'll usually use little tree guards, plastic tree guards, unless you want to be a bit more specific and do bigger guards, but I wouldn't. I would just keep them small. And then probably when you get to year 3, you'll want to do some more intensive fencing because the deer and the elk will love the fact that you've given them a feeding area far away from you.
You would just put little plastic guards on them, like won't the deer just
Depends.
it
No,
off
when
right
you
off?
start off. So if you're just putting in saplings and seedlings, we kind of we skipped over the fact that that's what I do. So I'm usually planting the smallest caliper I can, because the smaller you plant, the better off the tree is. Because trees don't like pot culture. They don't like being a nursery culture. And the longer they're in that pot culture, the less viable they are as a tree. Doesn't mean you can't buy a 6 or a 3 centimeter caliper tree. You can. It's just at year 5, 6, they've been bound in a root ball for years when they want to throw a tap root down and sink into the areas. Not to mention it's cheaper. So if you connect with the extension agencies in either University of Edmonton, University of Alberta, there we go. UFC doesn't have an agricultural extension. Olds does, and I think it's still doing tree nursery through the Shelter Belt program. But you can get a many stems for cheap. And if you get a group of folks in the area saying, hey, I'm going to buy 25, 35 chestnuts. Is anybody keen? And I'm going to buy a bunch of whips of hazels, or you're going to find a hazel you like and just, hazels are great because they're easy to divide. Just get a sharp shovel and just start taking off vegetative matter above and then root matter. And you got a new hazel, easy to do. But that then creates the ability to put them in. But usually if I'm doing small saplings, I'm just going to put a tree tube on them until they outgrow it. And then I'm going to do more intensive fencing. But the tree tube guards against browsing for the first couple of years. And then you may need to move to three fence posts and some fencing to keep them away from the deer. So that way they can grow a little bit taller to get out of browse range.
All right, good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, let's go pink question hunting. How do I deal with the swale to help water the trees along the driveway? Do I continue the swale along the contour? Do I stop the swale where it is? Or do I build up the swale so the contour remains consistent along the road? Yeah, great question. So arguably it looks like that swale would do really well until there. And then probably you'd have to build a second one, I would say. So if I bring up my tool, kind of looking at this shape. So we probably got a shape like this. So yeah, so you probably get something like this for this area. Then you may need to do it again on that. And this may be, yeah, so the problem with fruit trees and shrubs is you're going to run in here is the same as the other area. It's going to be a fencing issue, right? So same kind of conversation is going to exist where you're going to have to be conscientious that it's going to take quite a bit to develop this. And this may, as a strip, this may be easier just to fence completely. And then you may want to ask yourself, is this the best use of time and resources when I'd rather put in, the I'd rather move this back and then just create this as our entire orchard, and we're just going to have it in one place. The problem when you replicate areas, what's the yellow dotted line? Power. The problem when you replicate these areas and have separate areas in different spots is that you have the same infrastructure needs. Now you've just doubled it because it's someplace else. So I would think more about potentially having just an area that's going to be the orchard that you can walk into, you can control, you know, it's there, you got water to it, you can look at it, you know, all of that being in a centralized location, I would think about doing. If you did do this, I would say you'd probably need one swale here and then probably another here and then probably one more if you were going to design it that way, and then just have them cascade on each other. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, and that's a good consideration. So the other thing with like that, to have everything in one area and just build one fence makes like total sense than all this little fencing stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, we're looking at building the shop now near the house.
Okay.
And would it make more sense to put the shop on the other side and just continue the orchard behind the where all those annual beds are, and then move that pond where you suggested, like clear that whole area for an orchard?
Yeah.
That's all fenced in along with the annual beds, and then the shop is on the other side. Does that make more sense?
How wet is this area down here? Is this like you're walking any time of year and it's spongy?
Where are you
Down
pointing to?
here.
Oh, there is but it's hilly. It's a big hill.
Oh,
Like it goes straight down into the creek kind of thing. It's steep.
right. Gotcha. The only reason I'm asking is when we're starting to take a look at tree culture, I'm looking at this going, where or potentially how could I use the pre-existing open area to my advantage? So it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to like leave the full orchard up here unless you're going to fence this whole area and this is going to be the orchard, in which case it may make perfect sense because you've got this extra body of water. The one thing I would do if that's the case is I would take a specimen from each of these and put them beside the house. So that way I could see that specimen. I'm like, oh, the cherries are starting to bloom. Oh, the cherries are starting to ripen. So that way you've got a visual clue, because this is quite a far away from where you're at, but it would have redundant water, which is great. So that's a huge plus about that. If you did end up putting, you know, the shop over on the north side of the road and then clearing out a section, yeah, makes perfect sense. You know, clearing out this section of area or above. The big question is when you have forest, you're always got to think about your solar aspect. And fruit trees are very happy with 12 hours of sun a day. They do very well, especially when you get into the prairies. Prairies generally are going to really lean towards berry culture. It's generally what the prairies like. They like doing shrubs. They like doing, you know, tree berries. It's generally what we like to see. And if we start playing around, we can move into like the University of Saskatchewan fruit breeding program, the Romance series of the cherries and others. I think every homestead on the prairie should have a small collection or orchard of sea buckthorn. There's no reason not to, for the vitamin C. Not to mention, they make the most killer cocktail, a little bit of sea buckthorn, a little bit of orange juice, and the best reposado tequila. Man, there's no hangover the next day. I've tested this multiple times, but it's such an amazing nutraceutical to have on site, both from an internal perspective, and then there's the topical application, which the Korean and the Taiwanese pharmacy industry have lauded for years as being one of the best things because of the high fat. It's omega-3, 6, and 9 within the berry. It also has more vitamin C in a berry than an entire orange. So it's, you know, that would be useful to have as well. But yeah, I would agree, you know, somewhere where it makes sense in this area. This is, of course, as you were saying, a bit too steep, so that doesn't make too much sense. Man, almost want to just put a low dam across that. Just have this monster pond at the bottom. But yeah, I think it makes sense. Is there a way I can direct the overflow from the pond to be more useful in the space? It's on the downslope of the productive bed, so it'll just run past the house into a little garden. It can irrigate the high tunnels, but would be more useful at the other end of the 30-foot garden bed. Oh, you mean just like a little lower, you mean? Like down here?
No, I think, we kind of went over that it's not good to direct that towards the house and the gardens, so. Yeah, we kind of answered that, and I'll have to go over that again.
Yeah, like the thing is because it's going to be a dead level with the house, so there's no gravity, there's no head of this to use. Doing like a 1.5, 2-inch line from here all the way down makes really good sense, and probably putting it at proper frost depth so that way you have access to that water would be super useful, with cleanouts along the way if you ever need to blow it out, and you know, shut off valves where necessary. So I think all of that would make good sense, but the fire suppression pond is really about volume for a Honda pump is really what we're talking about. It would be active. You would have to be there. You'd have to work with it. The duckweed makes perfect sense. The ducks make perfect sense. Cattails, wapato, like all that makes really good sense. If you wanted it a little lower, a little higher, doesn't really matter. But with a small pump, you could run irrigation off of that quite easily for an hour or two a day. It wouldn't make a huge issue. So I think that makes good sense too.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for all that.
Hey, you're welcome. All right. Is that all the questions that I haven't missed any here? Doesn't look like it.
Yep, I just have to redo my whole concept plan for next.
Okay, and so let's make this point now as well. You don't have to redo it, right? You could leave it if you don't want to have a huge amount of labor, because you're there, right? You're there. You've got a lot of great elements here, so don't feel you need to completely redo it for submission, but redo it for yourself, and if you want to, great, but just don't lose too much sleep over it.
I'll try not to. Okay.
Sounds good. Linda, good to see you. I read and I followed instructions. I waited.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, expertise. You're welcome. I'm going to miss the accountability and feedback from everyone since our last assignment has to do with local network. I was wondering if any classmates who live in PA, NJ, or NY would like to be part of my network. That's awesome. Great to do the reach out there. Just seeing somebody threw in the chat. Sydney, I redid my, yeah. Sydney, you did above and beyond. You did like triple the amount of work with the aesthetic design, but it looks phenomenal. Sydney also took the aesthetic design for ecological landscapes course and just hit home runs every single design layer. You mentioned biodynamic gardening, and I read about it briefly. I'm interested in biodynamic planting schedule and calendar only. Do you have any suggestions? Yes, this is the one I used. It also has, I think it's Eastern time. So basically you just figure it out off of that. So plus or minus. Am I trained in biodynamic farming? Nope. Do I believe that Joseph Steiner figured out that cosmic energies can be captured by the planet? I'm open to it. I'm open to pretty much anything if it works. Did I undertake the planting calendar because I believe in it? No, I took it because it was easy. So separating plant, leaf, root, and fruit is one of the easiest ways to plant and seed that I found. I've done side-by-side comparisons of planting them and found that it actually improved the seedling quality and all the rest of it. So I actually really like it. I've got a photo someplace where I had an old index file folder. So like, little card size. And basically I just organized my entire seed collection into those 4 elements. And it was so easy to like pull out, go alphabetize and go, oh, that's what I need. Up until then, it's always just been buckets and buckets, like yogurt containers and big Tupperwares, the tough Tupperwares. But I really like that. That's one of my favorite ways to do it now. Thank you for the hugelkultur videos. They were helpful with the videos. There were fruit trees planted with rocks. Can you provide a little bit more context? Yeah, so let's make sure everybody's clear that I'm not saying plant trees in hugelkultur. That is wrong. So basically you dig a hugelkultur trench, and generally Mr. Sepp Holzer likes to dig kind of 1 to 2 meters down. They're intense. And sometimes 1 to 1.5 across. Really depends on your site. You size it appropriately. If you're trying to make soil and grow at the same time, you know, a meter and a bit down, meter and a half across is great. And then you pile up that wood up top and then you put on your soil. So in some of the situations that I've designed, we've designed in and placed rocks into the hugelkultur. Why do we do this? Because during the daytime, the sun radiates heat. That heat then is picked up by the rocks, and that rock then becomes a little ecozone, a little biome, a little niche for everything around it. It also means that if you're in cold temps where we get snow, the hugelkultur wakes up faster. The other thing that's important to know is that during the morning, because of the heat differential, you'll get condensate that happens on the rocks. And so in some places that have been super arid, I've actually used rock mulch, kind of big rocks around trees to help them to self-condensate and then feed the tree itself. It's a little bit, it's not like all the irrigation, but it's a nice thing to have. So that's why we did it that way.
Okay.
I have a design question. There's a pine tree adjusting to the house that I'm going to need to have removed. Arborists are coming this week to give my estimates. I'm going to ask them to repurpose the tree by chipping it. Nice. Cutting them into 2-foot sections so I can use to make raised beds or terrace my slope. Can the mulch be used this season? I was reading about pine trees having certain chemicals called terpenes. I know about hugelkultur, it's best not to use fresh. Yeah, so a couple of pieces there. So every tree has biocides within it. It has fungicides and biocides, and basically it's usually in the bark of the tree. So that bark is basically there to make sure that it doesn't have infection and then affect the tree negatively. So after cutting, you usually want to wait somewhere, depending on the tree, between, you know, a week and 6 weeks, sometimes, you know, 2 months, 3 months. Once we get into the conifers, they have more of those biocides, so you want to wait a little bit longer. So if you're going to use the mulch for pathways and you don't want growth in the pathways, you can use it right away. If you're using that to mulch, let's say trees, also totally fine, not a big issue, because it'll create an area around the tree, which we usually want anyways, that won't have inundation with pioneer species like grasses. Grasses and trees don't play well together. Generally, grasses put out allelopathic negative exudates out of their roots, which will negatively affect trees. So that's why you usually see that leaf fall around the trees, because the trees are trying to smother the grass so that way they can move through succession. So I would say, yeah, if you can, best to leave it for a year for the logs. If you're going to use them for building, you know, if you're going to leave them as round wood and in sections, that's great, because then you can just leave them, set them off to the side, make sure they don't get rained or snowed on, and then just let them check and slowly remove the moisture from them, and then you can just use them as round wood logs. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, awesome. Great photos. I feel like I know your site now. I've seen a lot of photos of your site. I feel like I understand it. And then, yeah, we kept it there. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. All right, Sydney. Oh, yeah, and then, oh, no. Hold up. What are we, Jane? Sorry, Jane. I'm all over the place. Could I build a hugelkultur bed on top of soil that has lead contamination? And would I be able to safely grow edible crops in the hugelkultur? Okay, so my approach to contamination, this includes heavy metals like lead. This includes most chemical toxicity. Is my first point of order, my first rule is I don't plant anything in the soil that will go in my mouth that could touch the soil. So I'm not planting root crops. I'm not planting leafy crops. I'm not doing any of that. Most of the research I did, and this was 5 or 6 years ago. So again, take it with a grain of salt. As I was doing some research this morning, it still looks like it plays out even more so, that the majority of the toxins, especially heavy metals or different types of hydro or petrocarbons or chemicals, are absorbed and mostly stay localized in the roots. They don't translocate to the leaf, and they don't translocate to the berry. I'm not saying that can't happen. I'm just saying what we've seen within the research is that it really doesn't. So I've had a few situations where I've had to plant edible shrubs and berries over contaminated landscape, and I was totally fine to eat that fruit. I didn't have any problems. And the testing we did that one time came up with nothing. So in terms of what the contaminant was, we didn't find it in the material. If I was worried about it, I would first test the soil, make sure I have a standard baseline. And then I would probably plant a fast growing shrub that produces a berry. Doesn't even have to be, you know, edible to humans, as long as it's as long as it produces a berry. Some people might say, well, that's going to be specific to the berry crop. Yeah, but it'll also give you an indicator in a few years, so you don't have to worry about it too bad. And then I would test the berry. I would set it off for testing. Unfortunately, I have no idea about soil testing labs in the Netherlands, so you'll have to do a bit of research there. Oh, and one thing I wanted to point out, because we talked about this before, but I didn't make the point, and I really need to. With hugelkultur, you do not plant trees in hugelkultur. Can anybody tell me why? I know I've said it a few times, but I just want to make sure we're clear. Why don't you plant trees in hugelkultur? What would be the reason? Because hugelkultur loses 40% of its volume over the lifespan of the hugelkultur. And losing the soil underneath you is not the way to grow a tree. So if you ever want to plant a tree in hugelkultur, you do it beside it. And this is the one design that I showcase on my website. And I just checked in with that project. And again, the hugelkultur saved them, I think, in their year 3. We're going on close to about 10 years now. So you plant it beside, because this will lose 40% of its volume, usually by year 3 in temperate climates. In tropical climates, you can lose it in 1. Does that make sense to everybody? No one's going to put a tree in a hugelkultur and say, Javin told me so. Good. Awesome.
I'm gonna do that.
There's always one. I don't have much space. Is there a minimum recommended size for hugelkultur? For example, something like 2.5 feet wide and 4 feet long. I'm concerned the space isn't wide enough to build up the mound, and I would be next to a fence, so only one side would be accessible. Also, I make a box like yours you show in the last office hours. Do you know how the instructions to build something like it? Yeah, okay. So yeah, a couple of things here to point out. So hugelkultur in and of itself does not need to be big. You could use a planter, you could use a little pot, and you could put some wood chips in the bottom or some, you could put some wood chips in the bottom. I'm just going to pull up that that presentation, because there's some diagrams there if you want to take some screenshots there. So let's do that one. So basically, you're starting with a pallet. Check all your pallets, whatever you're doing, make sure it's HT, which means heat treated, and not MB, which is methyl bromide. You do not want to touch a methyl bromide treated pallet. It is not for you. It's not good for you. We have 0 tolerance for the amount of methyl bromide that should be in our system. So basically what you do is you take that first pallet and you build a substructure over top of it. And so that substructure will usually have a racking diagonal, so that way it can't go back and forth. And usually done in like 4x4, 4-inch by 4-inch posts. So that way it's very stable. It's going to hold a lot of soil over the lifespan of it. After that, you're then cladding it, and you're putting in the little touches on the side for tools and things of that nature. But it's actually really quite straightforward. You're basically taking that pallet, putting in the uprights. Once those uprights are there, you may want to clad it. As I'm talking about here as well on the notes, if you're worried about the wood, which I would be, I would use lumber wrapper to line the inside of it and make sure that it was all lined, so that way wet soil isn't pressing up against the wood. You'll just end up getting an extra 10 years out of the box. You'd fill logs at the bottom. I'd probably fill up to halfway in something like this. Put in soil, and then as you lose that 40%, you're going to have to keep adding soil to it, because it's going to take quite a bit, because you're going to lose it. The one thing I would think about in this situation, and this is where we're not doing hugelkultur for hugelkultur's sake, or anything for anything's sake, is if you're in a small space, I would look at wicking beds over hugelkultur. And basically, wicking beds, I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to do a stop share. Come back to presentation. I've got a couple of great videos on it on the YouTube channel. If you just go to All Points Design on YouTube and then type in wicking beds, there's some great ones that I did with veg very edible gardens out of Australia, and then hatchet and seed contracting out of Victoria. So basically, a wicking bed is such that we have a reservoir of water that's in the bottom, And with the soil that's in the top, and we can do this with hugelkultur as well. So if this is the soil, we usually have these little indentations of soil that come down, usually in the form of pots. So usually we're just using 1 or 5 gallon pots, depending on the size, and it's got those little perforated holes in it. And then usually there's a pipe that comes down from the top and then fills this bottom level full of water. So water goes in here and then basically fills up water here. This then absorbs into the soil and you get bottom up watering. And the reason why bottom up watering is so important and valuable is that when you have bottom up watering and you've got your plant here, when you water from the top, where does the plant want to go? Plant wants to go to the top. So all the roots end up staying along the surface. And you'll see this, first year gardeners, if you don't know wetting zones and soil structures, the wetting plan is usually, make it as wet as you can for as long as you can and then walk away. But if you really think about sand, silt, and clay, the 3 components of soil texture, and you apply your watering regime so that way it works with the infiltration rate, if you allow for the wetting zone to be further down, what'll happen is it just pushes the soil roots deeper, and that then produces an incredibly robust plant over the annual conversation. The other nice thing here is that if you've got a series of these, and if they're on, a level surface, usually in small surfaces, small areas, we're dealing with that, you can actually put them in series and connect them. So you can connect this to the next one and then just fill one and you fill all of the beds together. So this is a replica of this one. This is our second one. And then this volume of water then is translated over the level of them all. If you want to do this in small version and if you have kids, take a look at the global bucket system. It was created by, I think, 2 14-year-olds at the time. And basically they used 2 5-gallon buckets. They used a little planting pot in the bottom of the top bucket, and they used a pipe through it, and they grew a ton of tomatoes and different crops. It was a really interesting way of creating wicking beds out of cheap or found materials. So just be conscientious about what you're using and why, because I think in some situations this makes perfect sense, especially if you have a pair of forks and you can move it around. But I think generally for most urban applications or small applications, a wicking bed makes more sense. And then using a couple of logs sort of mid-level. So that way, grab the tool again. So in this situation, I'd probably put the logs just a little bit up, but make sure that this wick was all soil. And then, 2 or 3 inches here, 2 or 3 inches, centimeters, 3. So 6 to 9 centimeters, and then put the wood there and then have soil over top. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to look into that.
Yeah. Awesome. Very. And if someone can remind me at the end, I'll try and find those videos. But if you just type in wicking beds on All Points Design, you'll find it. I'm a bit behind working on Zone 1 design now. My site is very small, so I want to do the whole site to be Zone 1. So I think there will be a lot of overlap between 19 and 21. Is that okay? Totally fine. No worries. Anything to help everybody at the end. I think my bosses know this, but I'm not a huge fan of how the assignments are laid out in the course. They were laid out from another instructor. And generally when you're designing, you design, patterns to detail. So you start off big, you start off like, what are your beds and what is your watering? What's your access like? And then you come down to the details of the plants. So it's a little backwards the way that they've suggested folks do it. I get why they did it because they want people to get an experience of doing the plant design, but I totally hear you. I own a rural property that I'd like to design at some point in the future. And I'm wondering if there's something easy I can do to now start building soil until I get there in the design, probably 2 years. I was thinking of broadcasting a native wildflower mix and sheep fescue over the leach field in the meantime. Would it be careless to do so without more knowledge? I don't have a lot of information about the site, but I'd want to use the time to benefit and prepare land for cultivation. The site is at 7,500 elevation in Colorado. Yeah, wildflowers are almost always, if you get native wildflowers, self-seeding, you're almost always in the clear. I would consider, if you're 2 years out, if you can find a large amount of manure and a large amount of chips, mixing it together and setting it off to the side. Just make sure it's not a massive pile, because if you leave something like that for too long, it can catch fire. So I'd probably leave it in a windrow. I'd probably leave it in a meter by meter cross section and then go as long as you like. Chances are it's not going to catch fire in that situation. So 3 by 3 feet. But big piles can definitely start to ash in the center. And over time, anaerobic conditions can create alcohol, heat, combustion, boom. So sometimes compost piles have been known to combust or just alight, especially in dry areas. So I would think about where could I potentially lay down the ground material for that. And if you do design a forest or an orchard or some kind of tree system, you can actually do whole planting compost. So you dig the hole, you layer in your sheet mulch, you let it compost in situ, and then you come back to it in a year or two. It's a great way to do it. So if you take a look at the design and go, yeah, I'm pretty sure we want to do an orchard, pretty sure it's going to look like this. We're not going to do swales. Instead, we're going to do just single holes. You can prep them like that in the future. Great questions. You mentioned the mentorship program. Any information? Yeah. So as I talked about at the beginning, sign up to allpointsdesign.ca. I'm thinking I'm going to do a poll out to your class and the previous classes sometime this week or next week before break, just to get a sense of if there's enough interest. If there is, then I'll fine tune the system. After years of offering workshops, I've gotten into the let's see if there's interest, and then I'll put an effort. So we kind of go toe to toe, like, oh, there's enough people. Okay, I'll design it a bit more. Oh, there actually is enough people. Okay, let's design the whole thing. Because all the information is here. We just have to design it into something that works. Great questions. Thanks, Jane. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so welcome. Sydney, composting options for suburban areas, trying to plan where it would go. Is it going to be in view wherever it is, unless I can fit it behind a garage somewhere? Was worried about the smell and such when we were enjoying the backyard. How would you set up a compost system? Okay, so first question, is this a get rid of kitchen scraps composting, or is this make good compost composting? What's the difference between the two? What?
Preferably make good compost.
Okay.
I don't have to buy it.
Great. So making good compost is not let's get rid of the kitchen scraps. You can do it, but it takes a little bit more education. And I'm doing a phenomenal course with Joe Tobias of Root Shoot Soil in the fall, which I highly recommend everyone take. If you don't want to spend $5,000 to learn how to make good compost from Elaine Ingham, learn it from one of her prime students who's really expanded her ability. So that'll be in the fall. So again, another good reason to get on the All Points Design website there. So generally, if you're designing compost and you're doing it the right way, there should be no smell. So first off, if you're using what's called the Berkeley compost system, which is the 3-bin, and basically what you want to do is within compost, this is the down and dirty. So here's our 2 side bins, and here's our center bin. All of these are a meter or more in each of their dimensions. 1.2 works really well. If you just do a meter, that's fine. But basically you want a volume of a meter. And so a little bit of extra helps. If you don't want to do it this way, you can also do the Johnson-Su bioreactor. And the Johnson-Su bioreactor is bomber. It looks like a space shuttle. So it's usually a big volume used with stucco wire. This is usually about 5-6 feet tall. And then there's usually piping in the center. So the piping is, if I remember correctly, it's like 1, 2, 3, and then 1 at the top and 1 at the bottom. And basically these pipes go all the way through. They're perforated so that way you can have air throughout your compost for the whole year that it's sitting there. You make it once and then you let it sit. This is the cool thing about the difference between these two. I don't have to do that one. Oh, that's weird. Okay. And then generally it's on a little pallet. And there is so many great explanations. If you even go to, I don't remember their first names. It's always Johnson-Su. But the 2 people who created it, they've got a couple of great YouTube videos that show you how to develop this. The great thing about this is you set it, forget it, and you leave it for a year and you come back and it's brilliant, beautiful, very fungally dominated compost, which is what we want. You do it the other way. If you do it the Berkeley way, it's a lot of labor. So basically, so the pros and cons, this is a lot of material up front and it looks like a spaceship and it's sitting out in some part of your yard. Doesn't smell, looks great. If you're doing this process, and if you're making good compost, it's the same idea, but basically you're doing 40, 40, 20. So you're doing 40, 40, 20. And everyone has their own way of doing this, but 40 browns, 40 greens, and 40 nitrogen in terms of volume. So basically you're making this material, you're putting all the material for the browns, the greens, and the nitrogen into a pile. You're mixing it up so that way it's homogeneous. And then what you're doing is you're putting it into this box. So all that material comes in. Hold on, let me just put in my uprights again. So all this material goes into this, and then basically get yourself a compost thermometer. A compost thermometer should run about 50 to 75 bucks. And basically when this hits 58 degrees Celsius, the outside becomes the inside. So basically you strip off the outside of this. So this outside here, so this is in here. This outside becomes the inside in the new pile. So this becomes the inside, and then this inside becomes the outside. Then when it hits 58 degrees, you do the same thing. This outside then becomes the inside on the third bin, and the inside becomes the outside. With the Berkeley method, the argument is you can make compost in 28 days, which is awesome because you're managing it. So the difference is this could be compost in 28 days, and this will be compost in a year or less, depending on how long you're working with it and using it. In this situation, you can always add your kitchen scraps to the top if you want. That's always doable. But if you want to make good compost, generally I'll have my kitchen scratch compost, kitchen scrap compost, which is generally just a box that I'm putting things into and adding. Usually kitchen scraps are high nitrogen, so I'm usually adding browns and greens at the same time. So that way I just kind of have something that's working. And then I leave it alone, and then I check it. And then my actual compost, the compost I'm making, so that way I either have compost for aerated compost extracts and teas, or I have application for the trees I really want to feed, is usually one of these two versions where I'm getting all of my material for my my greens, my browns, and my nitrogen. I'm mixing them together. I'm putting them in. I'm watering it so that way if I pick up an amount of material and I squeeze it and I get a couple of drops, it's perfect. I get a stream of water, it's too wet, so I have to let it air out a bit. So the top comes off, the sides come off, I let it air out. But generally, don't overwater your compost so you don't deal with that. And then you have to monitor temperature and you have to monitor moisture. So generally, compost needs to have a lid, so that way you don't have sun on it. And generally, this type of compost, you won't necessarily need to have rat proofing. But if you're doing the kitchen scrap conversation, you do. Usually expanded metal lath is what you need to have, because the rats love to get in there and make a mess. So those are the two ways I like to make compost. There's also what's called trench or static compost, which is basically you do the same thing, but you leave it in a row and you don't think about it for a bunch of years. You can do vermicomposting, which is internal and inside and is a higher grade of nutrition in both the castings of the worm and also the leachate or the worm juice. I want to say it's the worm farm. That's the one that I was recommending for folks when I looked at it, because the way it worked is that the worms would, yeah, that's how it worked. The worms would move up progressively, leave the castings behind. The leachate would come through and come out. So you could take a box out, not have to sift through and take your worms out. They would basically move upwards through the material. Yeah, I think it's called the worm farm or the worm machine or the other. Bokashi works, but the material that comes out of it can be hit or miss if it's good for plants. And so usually bokashi is for urbanites who are working and developing a system so that way they can take care of their material, but they don't want it to smell. So they have an airtight container. They put in bokashi inoculant. So it does require a purchased material that then breaks down anaerobically the material that you give to it. It can also break down animals, which is great. And then the other way that I've done that, which I really like, is we do a sunk. You know, those metal garbage bins that have the latch top? We sink that down into the ground. We drill a bunch of holes in it. We paint this matte black. So we paint the top matte black. And this is just above grade. And then basically I just toss in anything that I'm worried about or dealing with, and then add a little bokashi inoculant. And that works out phenomenally well. I love this system because it's so easy to use. The other system you folks have probably seen is the dark green cones, something like this. Similarly, they go into the ground. I think you might have seen it when I was showing the Harewood dog yield. It's very similar. They got holes in the bottom, but they cost a certain amount of money, whereas you can find these for free or cheap. and just stick them in the ground. And so that's sort of anaerobic bokashi. This is aerobic. This is aerobic as well. And then vermicomposting. Am I missing anything? Generally, if you can, run everything through chickens. But if you don't have that possibility, and I'll say this, there is a phenomenal video on YouTube from Hatchet and Seed Contracting about, if you just type in Hatchet and Seed compost and chickens, they have their compost bin, which is one of these bins, in their chicken run. So basically the chickens go through it first, they find what they can, they reduce the amount of compost, it runs through the chickens, chickens give us eggs, chicken give us meat, chicken give us digging and tilling operation. And then they get compost quite a bit faster. It's been their situation. So it's a really good urban design if chickens are available and of interest for the client. Does that answer the question?
Can I hop in and ask about, like, I've seen the spinny wheel
No,
bins.
no, boo.
Okay, I want to hear your
words.
thoughts though.
Grr, boo, wrong. Okay, so problem with
Okay.
spinny compost wheel thing. So generally what happens in compost is we have the materials and the interactions, so that way the biology, microorganisms within the compost will bioturbate, which is this beautiful word that means they'll kind of till. They'll move through until, break things down, move through until, break things down, move through until, break things down, move through until, break things down. They'll go over and over and over again, and they'll break things down to a certain type of material. The problem with that is, imagine trying to do your work and every once in a while being flipped over. Or imagine being fungus, which you generally want to have beneficial mycorrhizal fungi growing throughout your compost. Every time you spin that, they all break apart. It's just such a bad idea. It's so far from a good idea. And the compost that comes out of it, there's a study, I think 7 or 8 years ago, they did like side-by-side trials, same material goes into everything, followed the instructions perfectly. And that was the worst compost that came out. It was just trash. Basically because the biology wasn't able to grow and proliferate. Because the main thing about compost is it doesn't necessarily have nutrition in it. This is kind of one of those urban myths. It's that they have a high population of the soil microbes you want. Sometimes there can be nutrition in it, but generally you're giving an influx of workers, if you will, to whatever areas you're working in, which is why aerated compost extract works. You're not pulling out fertility out of the compost, you're pulling out workers. You're pulling out nematodes, microarthropods, protozoa, fungi, and bacteria. And they're then being applied into the landscape, and they're then doing the work that you'd want them to be doing in that situation. So the turning is problematic because it flips things over, it breaks apart. Like, think mother and child like being pulled apart. That's the sort of thing I think of when I see it. And you want a fungally dominated compost, beneficial fungi, mycorrhizal fungi. And when you churn that compost, it breaks apart because those hyphal strands are quite fragile. So same thing that happens in tilling is happening in compost. So it is not a favorite strategy of mine. It is not something I support. If you need something to do, you need to turn a little crank, could be useful. You know, it's nice to have something to do, but there's other ways to fidget, I think, that are more useful. Knitting, crocheting, manly art of crocheting. Yeah.
But
I
aren't
appreciate
in chicken composting, isn't the chicken ripping stuff apart?
Sure. So what chickens are doing is they're going up and they're doing macro ripping, right? So they're ripping apart, they're finding what they need, and they're defecating and they're urinating, which is fantastic. So they're running the material through an animal. This is one of the reasons why if you're dealing or designing in gray water or black water, gray water goes septic so much more quickly because it hasn't been processed through an animal. Most of the gray water that comes out of our house, out of the kitchen sink, out of the bathroom sink, that hasn't gone through an animal. The material that's gone through us has gone through an animal. And so black water that has feces and urine in it usually isn't as toxic as what gray water can be. And it's very similar. So as a chicken is going through and eating and digesting, using its crop and doing that, the beauty that it does, it's defecating and it's adding accelerants to the compost. And it's not necessarily like, you know, raccoon in a trash dumpster. It's not throwing things out. It's usually just digging through and finding the things it wants. And then eventually when that's done, you're putting on another layer and that's done. And so it's like you're supercharging each layer And then at the top, it's like, cool, we're going to cordon this off. Here's the new bin. We're going to leave that for a bit. And then we're going to go through that same 58 degrees Celsius and water testing to make sure that that changes. But it's a great way you're thinking, Minthia. It's the same way that I think. It's like, well, if that's true, why isn't this true over here? And the difference is because it's not being run through an animal. So the just turning is like a Ferris wheel for no good fun. And whereas this is like, I'm being eaten. This is amazing. I'm going to come back as something better. And it does. It comes back as feces, nitrogen rich for chickens, right? When we talk about animal manure, chickens is usually nitrogen rich. It's usually too hot to put on the garden right away. It has to be decomposed. Very few animal feces are perfectly ready for the garden. Llama is one, alpaca is a second, and rabbit is third. And specifically rabbit because they're coprophytes, because they eat the green pellets that come out first, and then they produce brown pellets. So it's very stable. It's very, very stable from the material, the nutrition that comes out of it. And then the rest of it, cow, horse even, all has to be composted for a little while. So that way the nitrogen becomes a bit more stable. Great question. Let's see if there's any chat questions. I inherited a worm farm from a friend and it's super wet. What is the best way to dry it out? Add more newspaper strips. So basically add newspaper strips, get back down to the grab, squeeze, one drop, and then leave it there. Generally, the food you put into it will wet it. Sydney, I thought there were no rats in Alberta. Yeah, according to politicians, but you know what they're called. So really. And then I have to go to a meeting, but thank you so much for all the help these last 20 weeks. Yeah, problems. Any final questions, folks? Well, let me have my little moment to chat a little bit about what's next for you all and my thoughts and directions, and then we'll get a chance just to talk about the value of today's session or the course. That'd be fun. So I came out of my PDC and I was given a link to Cosmic Bob's Plan for Your Life, which the Bullock brothers put out. And it was a brilliant sort of year-by-year, step-by-step thing to do. And it started with save seeds. And then it was like, learn how to plant. And then it was learn how to work with your hands. It was great. It was kind of recovery from Western civilization where we don't understand how to use our bodies and our hands and actually be producers. And I followed that for a couple of years. It was actually a lot of fun. The other thing I did was I reached out and I made a lot of connections post PDC. So I started a small permaculture group, started to meet called Vancouver Island Permaculture Group. Found out that that was dumb because Vancouver Island was big. And there was already a Victoria Permaculture Group and a Mid-Island Permaculture Group. So I just gilded with them and then started to offer ways to gather the tribe. So I started doing video nights. So I started finding videos and offering them and finding places for us to show them for free. And that then led into finding and creating a permaculture guild and adding to this permaculture guild and hosting monthly meetings, which were basically either movie nights, sometimes we did potluck, sometimes we had speakers, sometimes I spoke, sometimes other people spoke. But it was a great way to gather the tribe, kind of raise the freak flag and find all the other people who were interested in this way of being. I can't recommend it enough. It was phenomenal. And wherever I went, I was always a part of the Permaculture Guild. Wherever I was so keen to be there and so keen to interact with them and be present with them. It was a lot of fun. That led to a lot of opportunity. One of the things I've done really well is instead of being a pioneer species, which is being prickly, poisonous, and pernicious, I was that second gen species that made a lot of interactions with the ecology around me. I made a lot of conversations and connections. What I can say is post PDC, you have enough to be dangerous, but you don't have enough to really know what you're doing. So the first thing to do is to find a small project that you feel you can take on, a small portion of the garden, a small planter bed, just something small. By hook or by crook, if you want to go into business, you need to show people that you know what you're doing. And the best way to do it is before and after photos. So if you can go to community centers or other folks that look like their landscapes are terrible, and you just take one small bed and said, hey, I want to design this bed. I'll give all of my time for free. I'll give my labor for free if you put up the money for plants or if you put up the money for materials. It's a great way to get your first design in the ground, great way to get a stunning testimonial from somebody. And it's a great way to learn what you don't know, which is everything. So the great thing about plants is they teach you every single time you're involved with them. They just continue to teach you and allow you to grow. Same thing with soil, same thing with ecosystems. And the other thing I'll say is don't do what I did and don't become a hoarder of information. Don't become so enamored and excited. Permaculture gives a lot of people shiny thinginitis, where it's just like, oh, the new shiny permaculture thing I'm going to learn. Oh, the new book. And then you end up with 45 books that you're not reading. So work with this idea of kairos education. 2 words for time in Greek. One is chronos, sequential time. One is kairos, which is the immediacy of the issue. And generally take the courses you need to take when you need to take them. Or if they're like background knowledge, like, oh, I just want to think about soil and I need to have a better soil understanding. Great, take that whenever you can. But generally, if you need a course or if you need something, take it when you think you're going to need it, especially if you have a project. It's great to take a course when you have a project. It's one of the reasons why in the regenerative living courses, I tend to offer courses that allow you to bring a project so that way you can go through it with the instructor. From there, depending on where you want to grow or how you want to design or develop, just be conscientious about scale and scope. So do you like working on large projects, small projects? Do you like working on just the water element? Do you like working on the whole thing? Are you more of a person who just wants to make a boutique line of products that come out of sustainably and regeneratively sourced material? There's so much you can do in the permaculture world because the ethics are so strong and the process is so good that you can really apply yourself in a multitude of ways. And that's what I'm trying to address with the mentorship group. For those that are interested or want one-on-one mentoring, you can feel free to reach out. I usually end up with 5 or 6 students a year now, where I just directly mentor through a consulting process and contracted fee. But basically reach out to people in the fields you want to be great at, evaluate them for their work. This is something I didn't do at the beginning and I slowly did throughout my career. Evaluate them for their work, make sure that you can really see the work that they've done, and then feel free to pay for the experience you need. When we started the Eat Shoots and Leaves microgreen business, we reached out to Chris Thoreau, Food Peddlers. We paid him $2,000. He completely gave us everything to make a business. And we had our business up and running in a month and a half. So I've become a big fan of paying for information, because if somebody can save me an hour, somebody can save me a day, it's totally worth it. Because we all make mistakes. They just don't have to be our mistakes. They can be my mistakes and I can share them with you. Besides that, I'll echo David Shaw's comments, which is a PDC is a great place to start, but a terrible place to stop. Hopefully this is the beginning of the journey for most of you, or a continuation of, and you continue to seek out opportunities and new ways to apply yourself within this field. So with that, if I can help you in any way, shape, or form, 20 minutes for free is usually what I'll present to people. So if you need 20 minutes just to take a look at something or help guide you, I'd be happy to do that. Love hearing from students, love hearing from where you were from. At this point, I've got like 2,000 or 3,000 students over the last 15 years. So definitely let me know where you're coming from. And besides that, have a lovely journey with permaculture. It's such a great aid. It's such a great tool in the toolbox. And it's been such a pleasure to work with you folks over the last 20 weeks. I hope you all continue on with your work and do really well. That's it. That's all I have to say about that. In terms of today's conversation or the course, does anybody want to speak on the value of either just before we part ways?
Can I speak? Because I had to go back to work. I just want to thank you. I think this course in general and your guidance really helped me. I've done some what I call brave things this past few weeks. I went to a business meeting. I'm trying to connect with other permaculturists in this area, especially having to do with licensing and learning things like that. So I'm really grateful. I think the things that I've learned has helped me to be brave to do that. And I hope that I can continue working with you. Hopefully you'll have the mentorship program. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you for the experience.
Most welcome, Linda. Great instincts reaching out to people. Bravo. Anyone else?
Yeah, you answered all my annoying and incessant questions every week. And so I really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to hearing about the mentorship, because yeah, it's kind of like, where do you go from here? There's so many, it's such a wide area. So yeah, I really appreciate your thoughts and your help with everything, and the class was great. I'm definitely gonna go over all the office hours and all the videos again. There's just so much information that you can't absorb it all, you know? So it's nice to have continued access to the videos that we can watch them again. It's awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Cynthia. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I can jump in and say I'm just so grateful for this course in general, but also being specifically in your group whenever anyone's asked. Like I've mentioned that you have been one of my favorite parts within this entire course. So just in terms of the wealth of information, how you present things, how you use technology, your view of like life and landscape. So I'm just very grateful in terms of you being the one who's guiding us, me at least, through this. I can't speak to everyone. So just want you to understand that, how much value you give to people. So I'm really, really grateful. And excited to see, what the future holds from here. So thank you for this starting point, we shall say.
Yeah, no, that's very kind. Thank you very much. Very kind.
I can chime in real quick, just to echo Deanna's comments, and just, thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us over the course. I just feel very inspired to kind of continue this journey. And the course really exceeded my expectations, just with the amount that I've learned, the learning materials. I think the Google Slides template was really helpful for kind of just being able to kind of see where we're going and keep things organized. So really nothing but good things to say. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jane. My pleasure. All right. Well, I wish you guys all the best. I'm really looking forward to seeing all your final designs. And as usual, if there's any questions or comments or queries, if you want help in this last little bit, feel free to reach out. All assignments are due March 11th at 9 a.m. There is no, or is it 11th for you guys? I've been saying that the entire term. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Or it's next week. Oh, it's next week. It must be next week. Yeah, 11th. Yeah. So just make sure that you're in, and if you have any resubmissions, get them in before then, and have a wonderful journey with this work. It's been a great joy for me for the last decade and a half, and I hope it will be for you. It's great to have you guys all as colleagues now. All right, folks, we will see you later. Such a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.